Cardinal George, who was head of the Catholic Conference, said a few years ago, he said, "I expect to die in my bed. My successor will die in prison, and his successor will die a martyr." Was it an overstatement for Cardinal George to make that statement? I don't think so. I admired Cardinal George. He was a great man. So I think we are seeing a diminishing of the ability for people of all faiths or people of no faith to be able to practice what they believe. We were in Iraq a while back, and we are seeing the end of Christianity in Iraq. The Christian community, as well as other religious minorities, are being persecuted. The Yazidis, when we were there, we met with the Yazidi girls who told us there are 3,500 Yazidi girls who are still in ISIS. We're seeing the end of Christianity in the Middle East, in that region. More biblical activity took place in Iraq than any other country of the world other than Israel. Abraham's from Iraq, modern day Nasiriyah called Ezekiel is buried in Iraq. Daniel is buried in Iraq. Jonah, ISIS just blew up last year, Jonah's tomb. And before the war started, there was 1.5 million Christians in Iraq, and now they're down to 250,000, roughly 17 Christian families leave every day. And so the question asked by the church, the Catholic nuns, the religious community, is, does the church in the West care about us, or do they care about us? So I think what's taking place to Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East, particularly Iraq and Syria. Earlier this year we were in Nigeria. Christians and Muslims are being slaughtered in Nigeria. The #1 terrorist group in the world is Boko Haram. They're in Nigeria. The #2 terrorist group in the world, ISIS, has an agreement with Boko Haram, and the #4 most violent terrorist group in the world are the Fulani militant herdsmen. And yet the West is very silent, and we have 180 million people who are living in fear. And Bono, the Irish rock singer, made a comment several months ago. He said, if Nigeria fragments and breaks up, it will be an existential threat to Europe and to the rest of the world, meaning there were 25 million people in Syria. We have seen the refugee crisis create such a havoc in Europe, with 180 million people in Nigeria, not only in Nigeria, but in Cameroon, Benin, the Lake Chad region. So I think China, the Middle East, and Nigeria are the 3 most significant problems with regard to human rights and religious freedom in the world. And yet, on all 3 issues, the church is relatively silent. In 1984, I went with Congressman Tony Hall. We went to Romania, and in Romania there was persecution of the church. And President Reagan weighed in. As you may remember, President Reagan said that the words in the Constitution and the words in the Declaration of Independence were a covenant not only with the people in Philadelphia in 1776, but Reagan said it was a covenant with the entire world. It was a covenant with Sister Diana, the Catholic nun in Iraq. It was a covenant with a Buddhist monk in Tibet. It was a covenant with a tank man who stood up to the Chinese government in China. And that covenant has now been shredded, and the West has literally ripped the covenant apart. So I think we saw, with the support of Reagan, reestablishment and the freedom for people in Romania to worship or not worship, freedom of religion.
We are so thankful for our religious and civil liberties specialists who are working with us to make sure that this great American experiment continues, where we live together in our differences. You too can become a constitutional and human rights specialist focusing on religious freedoms. Check out religiousfreedomcenter.org to learn more and to apply for graduate level courses in the First Amendment. Join us again next week for another episode of 5 Minutes of Religious Freedom.